The wonderful Italian actress Anna Magnani was famous for yelling to makeup artists, "Don't you dare cover my wrinkles." It took me a lifetime to have them. Those wrinkles are precious because they tell a beautiful story. They're a celebration of our perfect imperfection. So this perfect imperfection is not something you need to pursue. It's the intimate footprint of your being human. That's what makes you unique and gives you a unique voice. In this episode, we're going to learn the power of imperfection, how to work with it as artists and human beings, and why do we hide from it by becoming usually either absolute perfectionists or sloppy and procrastinating. We're gonna learn to dance with this artistic tension and discover its powerful message while sculpting a new series of portraits. So I started out with a digital clay head, which is a reference head I created for the Digital Clay Essentials, which is one of the big news I wanted to announce, guys. And this is what I've been working on, basically. What you see, the UI, and the whole brush set, and light setups, and cinematic render. This is what I've been working on. It's basically an experience I designed for ZBrush, a collection of tools which transform ZBrush into a sort of sculpting atelier powerhouse. So everything you saw me doing throughout the first episodes is now condensed into a few clean buttons and tools. We got proportion grids, we got a few scripts I wrote, which I'll show you in a future video, and all the other stuff I mentioned earlier. But this episode is not about the Essentials Toolkit. There's going to be a whole video walkthrough about it if you're curious, and you can find more info in the description if you want to play with it. So I'm starting out with the sketch. This is a very simple and rough sketch. This is what I defined in the first episodes as feeling the structure. It's a very instinctive sketch based on something you want to explore. In my case, I found a very particular expression, a very particular emotion I wanted to explore in this new series. And what I'm basically doing is I collected a few reference photos. This rough sketch starts with something which sparked my curiosity as a sculptor, and it's a very particular emotion. And so this is the raw material which you need. You need to start with an intention. And now, once we have this rough sketch, the fun begins. And the struggle begins. That artistic tension I mentioned earlier begins. Because now we need to give a sense of story, a sense of completion to the piece. So now you see me in this moment, feeling various pulls in all possible directions. What I'll need to do in this video is to learn to choose and accept one of these pulling forces, and that's how you end the piece. And so this is the artistic tension. This is what you go through when you feel frustrated, when you feel down, when you feel that you want to give up halfway through the work. You need to learn to stay with this frustration. You need to learn to dance and resolve this tension and choose something and accept something as a direction for your path. So right now I'm just checking with my proportion grids something which didn't look right in the proportions of the head. It was bothering me. I'll probably come back to it later. And I want to explore, there's something which is bothering me in the eye structure. Of course, I don't intend to create a very detailed eye structure, actually. As you know by now, my style is very impressionistic, so once I find the structure I need for the piece, it could be very realistic, but usually it doesn't need to be very extremely realistic, but it needs to be true. So we need to know our anatomy, we need to know our structure of the figure, of the human figure. And in this case, I know that I need to push this forward. I don't want to overwork the eye section, because in this moment I like the fact that they are somehow destroyed, and so they suggest me something. So I'll come back to them later. In this moment, I want to refine a bit more the nasolabial structure, because it's all about refining the structure now. It's all about trying to understand that we're still at the beginning of the sketch and it's still not finished. I don't know yet why it's not finished, but I know it still needs to be completed. I see that the structure still has a long way to go. So right now, I'm touching the nose because it's still too rough in this moment. So as you see, I'm jumping from one area to the other of the sculpture. You need to do this. You need to learn to work in this way to avoid the roadblocks. And you constantly rotate and you constantly move away from your sculpture and you constantly look from above, from below. So you see me this moment refining a bit more. I need to find that sense of plasticity of the mandibular structure. It's still too flat. I want to get rid of this ear also and this zygomatic structure. It was too stylized. And I'm just using my first brush, which is very useful for creating this sort of finger-like quality of the clay. So it's like you're pushing into a stroke of clay. Right now I'm getting my knife brush. I want to work a bit more on the mouth structure. It's still too rough. It doesn't fit the piece. I could leave it like this, if it would make sense for the piece. But in this case, I need to have a very precise idea of the emotion, a very precise idea of the meaning of this expression. And so the spark of this expression mainly will be in the astonished action of the mouth and the forehead. Right now I feel that this area in the forehead needs more contraction, needs more truth. Truth is a term I use a lot in digital clay. And truth means, it doesn't necessarily mean hyperrealism. Truth means finding elements which reflect something into the viewer, And so in this case, I feel that the forehead still doesn't have a bold intention, that's still a bit too weak. It doesn't tell me too much in this moment. So I'm trying, this is where you see me dancing with the artistic tension, And this is exactly what happens. I'm exploring various ideas in my mind. I'm getting this brush. I'm getting another brush from the Essentials toolkit. This is very messy, but this helps me to break. Sometimes you just need to break through your blockages. And so you grab a big, bold brush and you just go with it. But then, that's what I'm doing now. I'm flattening it as just smoothing it out. It was too much, but it helped me out, I think, So I'm now clarifying. Do you remember from the first few episodes where I spoke about clarifying the intention, clarifying the shapes? This is what I'm doing now. I want to clarify the shapes. It means that messy was not very good in that moment. It may be good later on in the sculpture. And so I'm clarifying, I'm simplifying shapes. I want to get rid of this stylized zygomatic structure. It helped me out in the beginning, but now it's distracting me, and it's distracting us from the main idea of the piece. Let's just refine the mouth area. And also it would be I want you to notice how useful it is to try and memorize the main areas of the head or the main areas of the figure into chunks. And that's what I refer to when I talk about the mouth structure, the zygomatic structure, the mandibular structure. That is what I learned to do in sculpture school. And it's not something very anatomical. There's no such thing as a mandibular structure, for example, in anatomy. There are other terminologies we use. But this helps me to chunk how anatomy is organized. So now I want to get rid of these marks, which I did at the beginning when I was sketching. They're cool, but in this moment, I need to have more clarity. And something. There's quite a bit of work to do. I'm just trying to understand. Okay, so maybe I'm cutting in here. I want to clarify and define more the mouth structure. It's still too sketchy. So the sketch helps you at the beginning because it creates 80% of the final piece. If you don't have an instinctive sketch at the beginning, if you don't have something which comes from instinct, but at the same time from your sense of story, from your sense of perfect imperfection, as we mentioned at the beginning, then you don't have much to work with. You need to have something which triggers you. You need to have something which interests you. Otherwise, there's not too much of a point in making art, don't you think? We're trying to communicate something. We're trying to create a bridge with the viewer. We're trying to create impact with the viewer. This is a good way to make art healing, to make the artistic process as healing as possible for us and for the viewer also. And I'm dancing with the tension, dancing with the frustration, What do I want to do? Do I want to accentuate a bit more this area of the mouth? Maybe yes, because, it helps me into clarifying the shape. Now I'm switching lights. I'm using my light setups. In this case, I'm tweaking it a little bit. So if you downloaded the Essentials toolkit, you're not stuck, of course, with those 4 light setups. You can then tweak them. But they're just some really cool starting points I usually use in my projects. So I want to see a bit more, constantly change light, constantly change angle, constantly moving around. I'm not happy with the inside of the mouth yet. Let's try to clean this out. Okay, let's see. The hair. I want to leave a hint of hair. I want to feel as if the hair blends effortlessly into the head. So I don't want to define it too much, but I need to give it a bit more of structure. Structure is what a lot of beginners are struggling with. In the Facebook, I see that a lot in the Facebook group, and this is something which comes up again and again, and it's the lack of a sense of structure. I will never tire to use this word, and what this means is that you try your best not to have a flat sculpture. It's not a painting. We need to constantly push and pull, carve in and pull out. Feel the action of your hands on the digital clay. I need to fix the head, as you can see, was a bit too flat in the forehead area. Let me look at the profile. Switching lights. I want to see a few more things. I want to see if... Yeah, okay, now I have a more contrasty light, and this helps me a lot. Always try to have some strong contrast when you want to see peaks and valleys in your sculpture, when you want to see the forms. Avoid flat lights. Okay, I'm gonna give a bit more of a sense of completion to the hair shape. I still don't know where I'm going with this, guys, but we're gonna go there together, that's for sure. Cleaning out a bit, refining a bit the trapezius area, the shoulder area, the neck. This is not the focus of my sculpture, and I want to tell that, and I want to use that. You see, this is the same story of the perfect imperfection. I want to use this as a way of telling the viewer, this is not where your eyes should rest. So right now I want to get rid of this ear. This is the same deal, you know. I don't want you to stop too much and looking at the ears. They're not the focus of my piece. We can do the ear if you want. We can sculpt the ears if we want, you know. We can do a fantastic hyper-realistic study of the ear, but this is not the purpose of art making. At least not for us in this moment, for this piece. In this piece I want realism, I want truth, but I need emotion above all. I need a strong impact. Still, I'm lacking some structure in the mouth area. I need to work on this. I'm gonna grab my first brush. This allows me to push boldly inside. I'm thinking about, should I sculpt in the teeth or should I sculpt in the tongue? But I believe it's gonna distract me. And it's gonna distract the viewer from the sort of sense of amazement that the subject has. So I'm moving on. I want to refine a bit more the nasolabial structure. I want to avoid, what you want to do in this area, you want to avoid the feeling that you just carved in a line. this is another mistake which beginners make a lot in sculpture, and it's carving lines. Sculpture is not just carving lines, it's a collision of structure, it's a collision of masses. So instead of carving in lines, for example, in this case, I'm using my first brush. This helps us a lot in creating this sort of a collision of forms, because I designed it so that it behaves exactly like if you're pressing a finger inside the clay. So this helps us. So I'm gonna use now the auto remesh. Auto remesh is a plugin I designed which basically automatically duplicates the mesh, z-remeshes it, and reproject all the details from the previous mesh into the new one. There's a limit of, I think I set it to 8 millions, so whatever mesh we have now has a maximum of 8 millions. It will reconstruct all the subdivisions, so all automatically. I was honestly very tired of doing the usual thing of duplicating and projecting, so it's just one click now. It's very cool. And this is all based on the idea that I want this kit, I want this essentials experience to be all about the, not breaking your focus when you're sculpting and just thinking about digital sculpture, so literally this is what I want to do when I'm not at the office, or when I'm not working for some when I'm not working for some very for some production oriented material. So let's hit again this mouth structure. It needs a lot of work, and slowly it's coming along. So what I'm doing is I'm defining, I'm simplifying and clarifying. Moving around. Now the lower mouth is very sketchy again, but it was basically too irregular, and I didn't understand it too much. So when you don't understand the shape, break it down into 3-4 simple strokes. Now you can refine it a bit more, and I can recover what I lost. You see, I am recovering what I lost in terms of emotion, in terms of truth. But now I have a solid structure to work on. So this is what I mean when I talk about structure. So yeah, trying to refine a bit more. Refine it a bit more. And I'm using the knife in this case because I want to create some very bold depressions in this area. I want to see if they help me. So going back to the original, I want to go back to the original, to the opening of this episode. And why the hell are we so scared of imperfection in our life and artwork? This is something I ask myself a lot. And, we're so scared that sometimes we stare at a blank canvas for hours, or we abandon our work halfway through, or, we stop playing guitar after a few failed attempts. And we are so scared because we think showing our imperfection means we're a fraud. We think that by meeting imperfection and by meeting our human nature, which is by nature flawed, we think that we'll discover that we're a fraud, that nobody will like us as artists and nobody will accept us or approve us, or, nobody will showcase our work. And when you grow as an artist, there's something which is very important that you need to discover, and you need to discover that that's exactly the opposite. So you discover that your beautiful imperfection gives authenticity to yourself and gives you a voice as an artist. So once you learn the meaning of imperfection, once you learn the meaning of imperfection, then you can appreciate its contribution. So you can share it, you can share your work and start impacting people through this unique work and voice of yours. But until you don't realize the beauty of imperfection and your voice as an artist, there are 3 ways I discovered through which we hide from it, through which we hide from the possibility of being revealed as imperfect, as a fraud. The first one is by being sloppy, by not working hard enough, which sounds like the most simple way of escaping from the fear of imperfection, you know? If I don't engage fully in my craft or work or whatever, I can still be labeled as a beginner maybe. So I will not worry about being rejected or approved. I'm just a beginner at the end of the day. Now, this is one way of hiding from imperfection. The second way of hiding from imperfection is by doing the opposite, by going the opposite way, by striving for absolute perfectionism for the sake of perfection itself. The basic idea behind this is, I really don't know what to say, so I will make something which is objectively perfect. And this is, unfortunately, this is the curse that our 3D world is suffering from. You know, our 3D world is quickly becoming very dull and standardized. And in this industry, we have a very specific term for this issue. And pardon my French, but it's called pixel fucking, which is basically a unique focus on hyperrealism. But I will talk about this more later. The third way is by basically procrastinating and never doing the work. So of course, by never doing the work, nobody will know if I'm perfect or not. So we're scared of imperfection. We escape from it by being sloppy, perfectionist, or by not doing anything at all. But the main idea behind this episode, and actually behind the whole Digital Clay channel and behind the whole Digital Clay project, is that we shouldn't be afraid of our imperfection as artists. We should recognize that, understand why it's there, work with that, and use it as our own footprint. So we're not pursuing imperfection as an end in itself, because that would be just fear of showing up or fear of doing the work, of getting out there. Imperfection is the footprint of your best, most authentic work, which comes from determination, practice, study, sacrifice, and showing up, digging in, going after those emotions, those ideas. And you will discover that those ideas, those emotions which you have in mind, they're not perfect, but they're true, and they have a meaning behind it. They have a story. And this story is what I try to convey as an artist in my work. And that's the big secret, actually, of art making, So we're not striving to do standardized work where we're just trying to replicate a camera. It wouldn't make much sense, because there's a lot of better cameras than human beings out there. And there's a lot of AI and robots being invented right now, which will soon replace us, which will soon be very good at making predictable and perfect work. So why would you want to be predictable and perfect in your work if that's going to be replaced anyway? But in any case, why would you want to do something predictable and Well, let me tell you something, because it's a shelter. It's a shelter. If I do something predictable, if I do something which is easily recognizable, in our case, in the 3D world, if I do the usual likeness, or if I do the usual sculpt of a particular character from a famous superhero franchise, then I will be recognized. Everybody will recognize it. And it's easy because I don't have to dig too much, But that's the opposite of art making. Art making means digging inside yourself, digging into your soul, digging into a meaning. And I think we're losing it a bit, in the 3D industry. And my whole mission actually is recovering this sense of art making in the digital sculpting world. But enough blabbering, As you saw, for the last 10 minutes, I didn't know what to do with the mouth. There's something wrong, so I tried just pulling in a bunch of clay to create a sense of depth, and it's actually helping me a lot. Because now that I see dark inside, I understand that this is what I wanted to do. Of course, you need to be careful with imperfection, as I told you earlier. You can also hide by being sloppy. You don't want that. You want to make sure that imperfection is not an excuse. It has to be a footprint of who you are, not an excuse. So let's check again from the side with my proportion grid. And this is something I built because basically, I just wanted to have a quick way to quickly gauge the proportions on the go. And so what I'm gonna do now, I want to refine a bit more the sense of the hair. And pay attention. And as you may have noticed in my work, I talk a lot about sense, because I rarely work on hyper-realistic stuff in digital clay. I leave that to my studio work. So I want to create a sense of hair. I want to create a hint. I don't care to design every single strand, because as we said, there are cameras out there. They're gonna be better than you at capturing all those hairs. So we need to tell something a bit more interesting than a camera. So I'm gonna use my first brush to create sort of little chunks, which suggests some movement, movement going behind. And I want to move around, always make sure that you have structure there, stuff going in, stuff going out. Okay, in this case, what I want to do, I want to try and lightly tap with the first brush. I want to create a bit more of structure in the left eye. Maybe suggests something like desperation. Or it could be something like sweet melancholy, The basic idea is that I want to create this sort of astonishment. I still don't know if there's a lot of sadness involved or there's some kind of relief. There's some kind of happiness, subtle happiness inside this. I'm still working on it. We're still dancing with that artistic tension, guys? So here I'm using the cinematic render just to have a sense of the sculpt so far. And basically, what we want to try and do is keep it and be at peace with our own art. So I'd really like for you guys to turn on the channel. And maybe you're feeling a bit, lack of motivation, lack of encouragement. We all feel that. Turn on the Digital Clay channel and just try to find that spark again, together, and just finding a bit of comfort in this amazing path, which is art and art making and being human. Look at what I'm doing. I decided that I wanted to create a bit more of contrast, a bit more of a emotion in the forehead. I was missing something there. And so I just tried to have the sort of brush strokes. Very loose, very loose. So stuff is coming along. So maybe refine a bit more the right area of the eye. Create a bit more of structure around the keystone area of the forehead. A bit more mass around the eyes. I don't want to sculpt eyes. I enjoy a lot, actually, trying to, in my work actually, I enjoy a lot trying to recreate, trying to suggest the idea of eyes with a minimal amount of brush strokes. Bringing in a bit more the cheek structure. Let's carve in more the nasolabial mass. I want to have a bit more. You want to have the sense that the masses of your sculpture are clashing against each other. Let's avoid carving in. I'm doing it now, but I'm working where we already see two masses. I'm gonna grab my knife tool. And I'm gonna use some of my texturing brushes. They're a bit more textural in the sense that they will give you unpredictable results. And then you can go back in and refine where you want to refine and keep whatever you want to keep. So all of the digital clay brushes now are like this. So they're very different from whatever you find out there. They're not textural in the sense that they're simply an overlay of an alpha. It's not that at all, actually. I played a lot with the settings, so actually you could even disable the alpha. They should behave quite fine. Well, don't do that, but because they may not work. But the idea is that all these brushes, they create, let's say, improvisations in your sculpture, which behaves a lot like traditional sculpture, at least for my hands. And so you can start using these imperfections, in your favor. Using them in your advantage. So let's bring up, I think I want to refine the head structure. I want to bring it up a bit more. This is another very common pitfall which we all commit, and mostly beginners, and it's the flat head syndrome in sculpture, which means that we make our head, which we make our portrait, too flat, and we give him a very short head. Whereas, as we know from the first episodes and from the proportion grid, the midline which cuts through the eyes should be vertically the midline of the mass of the head. So this is what I'm checking when I look from the side. So now definitely I have a more organic sense of structure. Checking in again with the proportion grid. I want to have 3 nice thirds, 1, 2, 3 vertically, and 3 thirds also on the side. So it's all about thirds. Bring up a bit more the mass of the head. So yeah, I was thinking, let's try a cinematic render. Cinematic render, it's basically creates a BPR render. Creates a BPR render with the digital clay settings you've seen so far. It's good because it gives you a sense of the shadows and lights, contrast, which is very important. In sculpture. I'm trying to compress a bit more the left side of the face. I want to have a bit more of asymmetry. Remember, asymmetry is one of the principles we want to use in sculpture to create interest and truth in our work. You may think of truth, when I talk about truth, you may think about it as an alternative term to realism. But as I said multiple times now, I prefer to talk about truth than realism. Realism, it's a bit sterile. It's a bit an end in itself. Now, if you use realism for an artistic end, it's really cool, it has a meaning, it has a purpose. But if you just focus on realism and hyper-realism, you'll miss the point. Because you focus so much on how to say something, and you completely forget what you wanted to say in the first place. That's the problem with hyperrealism. You're so focused in all those details, you're so focused in overlaying those poor details that you forget about zooming out a little bit, zooming out from your work, zooming out from your life also, and see the big picture, and try to remember, hey, why am I doing this? Why am I sculpting this guy? What's the intention behind it? Is there emotion? Is there meaning? Is there an exploration? Is there curiosity? Or it's just a technical experiment? It could also be a technical experiment, but then you'll be missing out on a lot of stuff, if you don't discover the other side of art making, which is meaning, emotion, feeling, intention, storytelling. And then you can use technique as a vehicle to bring all that other stuff to your viewers, not the opposite. You want to have technique as a final endpoint and then use emotion and all the rest as a vehicle. Okay, this is what I'm doing now. As you see, this is a happy accident. I used my second brush, which is a bit more messy and it's a bit more volume based to create some strands of hair. As I mentioned, I don't want to sculpt the hair, but look at this. This is what I wanted to have, a sense of structure for the hair, and it's cool because I think I managed to achieve sort of I managed to achieve an interesting organic look for the hair that I didn't plan to achieve at all. And this is exactly what I mean when I talk about accepting your perfect imperfection, It wasn't perfect. Those brush strokes I created up there, they're not perfect, but you discover them and you learn to choose them. You learn which mistakes to make, which mistakes to keep. So right now I want to create a bit more of a bold silhouette for the mandibular structure. I'm not sure about these marks here now. Are they compatible with the main emotion of the portrait I'm trying to convey? Are they serving the purpose? And there's not an intellectual explanation to this. you know. It's just you. You're the only one who can decide if these marks make sense or not. And then the viewer, of course. The viewer will receive something if you're honest about them. Because what you're leaving are those footprints, are those wrinkles which Anna Magnani never dared to fix in her face, in her beautiful face, because they tell a story. So all these little brush, they're not alphas, they're not texture as in many other packages you can buy. We don't want to work like that. We don't want to create a perfect, smooth sculpture and then stamp alpha details on it. We want to have an organic sense of the sculptures while we are building it, while we are working with the brushes, with our fingers, our digital fingers in this case. So I went a bit too far with this idea on the eyes. I don't want to go that far. But the rest, it's cool because it's giving me a bit more of urgency in the expression, in the emotion. And now I want to come back to this forehead. There's more. We can push it more. We can push it more and more. And you want to push your sculpture to the maximum depth, to the maximum intention you can reach. It can be very subtle. This doesn't mean that it needs to be a very strong expression, you know. This doesn't mean that it needs to be a human figure at all. You need to be very clear that in the artistic work, you need to push your vision to the maximum extent. To the maximum extent. So I was talking about the 3D industry, and you know, this is the whole idea behind what I do with digital clay, and it's basically born out of a few quotes from Seth Godin. He's a very cool entrepreneur and educator and blogger, and he says, an artist does human work, unpredictable work, makes a connection with someone else and changes them for the better. Or another one, which is very cool, is an artist is not just a replacement of a camera. An artist depicts a world he sees. How you see that is your voice, is your art making, the choices you make. You know, the way I'm now deciding to smooth out the sculpture is very different from the way you'll decide to smooth yours. That's your voice. You don't need to struggle that much to find it, to find your direction. You just need to accept your curiosities, your inclinations, your explorations, your passions. And unfortunately, in the modern visual industry and 3D industry, we became too good at emulating reality. We are too good in the 3D industry in emulating a camera. And this distracts us from our real, authentic, creative work. We forget what we wanted to say to start with. We forget what makes us dream in that painting, or in that short, or in that animated feature, or what captured and elevated us in that sculpture. So as I said, AI and machines will be tasked with being perfect, repeatable, and average, but not us. We are unrepeatable, messy, and unique. And that's where your value is. That's exactly where your value is. So forget about pixel fucking. Trust me. Well, maybe not at work. If your work entails a lot of pixel fucking, then of course. you can use that as a Zen exercise to train your patience or your eye for detail, as it's very fashionable to say or mention in our resumes. Eye for detail. Which of course is very valuable. As an artist, you need to have an eye for detail. The problem is when your eyes get stuck in the detail. That's all. So again, I'm here with the mouth structure. I need more truth in this area. I need more structure. I need more masses. So cutting in this area of the lips. It's a trick, you know, it's a stylization. Usually it works to give some sort of a bolder shape to the mouth. And remember, a lot of what we do in digital clay comes from what some may refer to the Russian constructive tradition, I guess, which actually draws from the Italian Renaissance tradition, whereas you basically want to reach a point where you're able to conjure a representation of anatomy in a very plastic way. So that will be already 70% of your work, you know, in terms of plasticity. And becoming very, very good at measuring relationships between one place and the other. So of course, I will always try to have as many references as possible. If I'm working from a model, if I'm working from a picture, I will try maybe to get other pictures. But what you want to try and do, develop this sort of a sensitivity to a universal shape, to a universal structure which you are able to construct. And that's what I did in the toolkit. If you got the toolkit, or at the beginning you saw there was a bald head, basically it's the study head, let's call it the digital clay head, and it's a reference head basically. Now of course, this is my personal path, this is my personal interpretation as an artist, and you don't need to feel constrained to this way of working. It may be that in your work towards hyperrealism, and that's okay, or you want to be more abstract or more figurative or less figurative. That's okay, that is fine. We're still exploring figurative sculpture, and these are all the tools we have at our disposal. But what's important, and what I'm asking you, consider what you want to say with your sculpture. Try this as an experiment. It will completely change your work. What's the main intention behind it? It can be something very light and something very funny, you know. A very light theme or motive. Still, let that main intention, that main gesture guide you. Trust me, try this for a change. Don't say, okay, look, I'm gonna try the Wolverine likeness, or you know, I'm gonna sculpt a jacket. They are fantastic exercises for technique and representation, but trust me, try this for a while. Try digging in and see what's your real work, what you really want to convey. And you'll start discovering a fil rouge, a thread, a unifying thread throughout your work. And that's how you also transition from going from a craftsman position, which is very respectable, and that's what we need to possess in terms of skill set. All of us artists need to be very good craftsmen. But at the same time, you are allowed creative freedom, and you're allowed to go towards art making, towards personal stylistic choices, personal artistic directions, experimentation. That is how Impressionism was born, you know. Impressionism was born out of the desire and need to break with a very imposing tradition, mostly in the landscape painting tradition. And somebody discovered that with a few simple colors here and there, but true to nature, you could evoke amazing emotions, which maybe a very realistic painting was not able to. Or maybe yes, there's not an ultimate answer to this. It's all about what works for you. But the bottom line is work from the inside out, inside of yourself, inside of your soul, out to your artwork. So I'm just, now in this moment, I'm just going with the flow, you know. I don't have any plans. I know that I needed to push through, and I'm comparing to my old work. So definitely what happened is better for my artwork. I feel that it has a stronger direction, stronger emotion, a clearer intention. That's also very important. Unless you're playing on ambiguity of intention in your piece, you want to be very clear, very strong, very powerful. And as I said, it doesn't need to be exaggerated. It can also be very subtle. You can be very powerful in very subtle poses, in very subtle expressions, in very subtle representations, in very subtle storytelling. Definitely, you saw that the inner part of the mouth was bothering me, and how I fixed it, it was basically pushing it down so it doesn't distract us visually. Now I want to start working on where the eye doesn't need to stay too much. And so I'm complementing, I'm finishing the lower part of the sculpture, and I just want to create a sense of mass, a sense of organic mass of clay. And as you can see, all of my brushes, they don't have a very specific alpha texture. I don't want that. You can buy a bunch of these brushes online, but that's not how I want to work and how I need to work to have a sense of clay, of digital clay in my hand. So all of these brushes, that will basically, they're very structural brushes. They're bold. You can control them to a very fine degree, actually, if you want. But they will help you making mistakes. And the truth is that they're very similar to clay, and that's what clay does. And once you become good at distinguishing between which mistakes to keep and which mistakes to refine, it means you're slowly walking your path as an artist. And this path is infinite. It's infinite, it never ends. You're always evolving, always discovering. So right now I discovered that this brush creates something which could be very cool to have here in the lower side of the head. Create a bit of variety, a bit of contrast between the top part of the head and the bottom part of the hair. Still not too much. I don't want to overdo it. So creating a very messy structure. I want to give a sense of, this thing coming out from the messiness of clay, from the chaos of clay. Then we have the sort of organizing principle, which is our artistic intention. But we play with it. We don't go all the way towards perfectionism for the sake of perfectionism. We play there, we play in the middle. We dance with the artistic tension, with imperfection, with perfection. Maybe some little clay marks here. So I'm still not thinking about finishing the sculpture in terms of texturing as in sculptural work. But I'm now in a final stage where I'm very convinced that the original meaning of the sculpture is there, the emotion is there, but I can do a bit more of subtle work to give a bit more dignity to the pose, to the expression, to the gesture. So maybe refining a bit more these ideas while creating some texture, while creating some interesting materiality which complements the whole idea. And as you can see, the main theme of this episode is pay attention to your work, to your imperfect brush work, to your imperfect interpretation, because in reality, what you're doing is you're celebrating all this, the story of your work through your brushwork. So you're not in a rush to refine everything and to clean everything out, because your eye became very good at distinguishing which shapes can help you in finishing the piece. Some shapes, they will suggest the viewer what he needs to see. They're not an eye. For example, in this piece, I didn't sculpt two eyes. I didn't sculpt them. But I suggested them and I created an impression of something. And this is the study of anatomy applied to that sort of constructive approach. So you cannot just study anatomy. I know a lot of people who study anatomy, did a bunch of anatomy courses and workshops, yet they cannot apply that to their artwork. So why is that? What's wrong? Why are you able to name every sort of bone and muscle and tendon in the face or in the body, but you're not able to translate that into plasticity, into a realistic, into a truthful work? The reason is that we need to train into translating those concepts into artistic work. And we're almost to the end of the first episode. So what I can recommend you, find something that gives you a spark, maybe a feeling, it may be a reference picture, a still from a movie, or the picture of your wife or your kids, or a painting, and then start sketching it and start bringing it to life according to your story and voice. And then feel free to share your results in the Facebook group. Subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I'll see you soon with part 2, where we're gonna take this guy and refine it a bit more and bring it to completion and bring it to the final rendered results which you saw at the beginning and you see here. So until then, keep sculpting, stay safe, and I'll see you soon.